Hello and welcome to the Optimized Equine Podcast. Today I'm joined by none other than Carl Paoli. I struggled a little bit with how I was going to introduce Carl because he wears many hats. Carl has a number of titles, among them an elite gymnast, a movement specialist, a coach, and an author. So why did I ask Carl Paoli to join me on the Optimized Equine Podcast? That's because over the years that I have been familiar with him and his work, he has introduced me to a lot of new things and also put into words so many concepts and absolute gems that directly relate to the type of horse training that I am so passionate about. And more recently, Carl became one of my corner turners, which I've mentioned in previous episodes, are people, animals, or events that change the trajectory of our lives. So I'm excited for you to get to know Carl, and I hope you enjoy the episode. There we go. We're going to make this goal official. Mm-hmm. My goal is to not edit this episode. We're putting it right out there.
Yeah, right. Life is unedited, so I think it's worth just letting it rip, see what happens.
See what happens. Mm-hmm. Well, Carl, thank you so much for joining me today. I am super excited to be chatting with you on my podcast.
Well, same. Thank you for having me.
Yes. I am going to just start out with a little backstory about how I came to know you. Technically, I met you a fair amount before you met me because I heard you as a guest on the Align podcast. And that was in about 2020 or so on my end. And then made my way over some time to your podcast, which I am a huge fan of that whole body of work. So good. And then I made my way to your book, Freestyle. And then, I was an avid podcast listener, avid content consumer. And then in 2023, I believe I just commented on an Instagram post that turned into a conversation that led to us doing some coaching together, which ultimately led to me bestowing you the title of one of my corner turners. You definitely helped me at a time that I just had too much in front of me. I had to turn a corner before I could see what the heck was going on up there. So we won't get too far into my stuff today, but I really I was very appreciative of the things you have helped me with, both before I actually talked with you and then in that coaching situation. So thank you so much. That's a little bit of our how we came to be.
Yeah, that makes me feel really good. Yeah, exactly. That makes me feel really good. It feels really special to know that one can kind of just do their thing, and somehow through the internet, some people on the other side resonate with it, and then all of a sudden, here you are. And like you said, we've been talking since 2023, and I didn't even remember how it kind of started. But you reminded me right now, and the fact that I'm on quote unquote horse podcast is kind of funny. It it feels like
yes,
it's almost like that movie. What's it called? Notting Hill, where he wants to see the girl, the famous actress or whatever, Julia Roberts, and he's to meet up with her, but it happens to be a press conference. So he walks into this room, and for people who've seen it, they know what the story is. But he goes in there, and they think he's some media personality. And they're like, "Who are you with?" And he goes, "I don't know." And he looks down at a magazine and it says "Horse and Hound." I kind of feel like I'm him right now, showing up here like, "Oh, here's the fitness coach or whatever, lifestyle coach coming in." Talking about horses.
Yes. Well, little do you know, you really would be an amazing horse trainer. I'm certain. There's too many things going on that align. You'd just be good at it. I'm sure of it.
Well, as a representative of Horse and Hound, I'm happy to be here. And
on a serious note, this is actually the perfect little segue because I was going to talk about your book Freestyle first.
mm-hmm.
Feel is such a thing that's so important in horsing, and I think it's a broad term, but the way that I look at the term, it is what makes people good and successful with horses. And it is no coincidence that usually those people are good and successful with people and a lot of other things. So your book, Freestyle, I don't even know if book is the right word. Do you call it a book? Because
I mean, it's a book.
it is a book. It is a book. I have a copy right here.
It was technically a manual that I wrote with my co-author, and we can talk about my co-author, Tony Sherbandi, later if you want. But I wrote with my co-author, who was actually a client of mine first. And at the time, he was a PhD student in neuroscience at Stanford, and also somebody that I was working with on learning how to do acrobatics applied to capoeira. Anyways, we wrote it as a manual to the people who were attending my seminars at the time. So yeah, it's a book, but it's technically a manual for people who were in the CrossFit space specifically and cared about applied gymnastics to fitness. And what I was trying to do with the book was to give them a language that they could use that would be universal and translatable into specific methods. So if I was talking about squatting, the squat should be applicable to not only gymnastics, but also weightlifting and other modalities. And it was all around this idea of skill transfer. Anyways, all this to kind of say that at the core of the book, I had this intuitive sense that it all had to come back to this idea of feel and human performance being measured by feel, which is it's supposed to be kind of like an oxymoron type thing because how do you measure a feeling? How do you measure a sense? And it was just to get people to understand that human performance at any level starts with a feel, a sense, a connection to what you're doing in this moment. And I think that is applicable not only to ourselves in terms of self-governance or autonomy or learning something, progressing, but also in relationship to working with other people, whether it's somebody that you're training or coaching, and also applicable to possibly animals, I guess, and maybe more fundamentally so as the logical pursuit of progression with animals is probably very different in the way that we communicate it. That's an open-ended way of kind of explaining the thesis behind the book and this idea of feel and how it applies to my thinking.
Yeah. There is, I'm just going to read this little piece off the inside cover here. That's all right. And,
let's see what I said.
Yeah. See if you remember this part. No, but this, I could take this piece and change like 2 words and go stick it on my website and be like, this is what I love doing with horses. So that's what I think is really a cool thing about this book. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But this book shows you how to turn on and trust your intuition about movement, recognize and improve inefficient movement, enhance respect for all physical disciplines by understanding universal movement patterns, tap into the universal movement patterns and progressions underlying all disciplines, create roadmaps towards your unique physical goals, learn what being strong really means.
Wow.
It's good stuff, huh?
That's pretty good stuff. You know what? As you're saying that, I still believe it. And in fact, less than 90 minutes ago, I was having a text message conversation with a person who I currently work with and coach. And we're talking about exactly this, which was this idea that when you meet some resistance, especially, which is, I think this is going to come up in our conversation, especially when you meet some resistance in life or in your progression and performance, that's when you start to become aware and cognizant of something that is occurring. And you may not have the logical, practical solution to moving through that resistance in this very moment, but you do have a sense. And if you allow yourself to be guided by intuition, which doesn't always produce the best results, but it can if you know how to navigate it, at least you have the most secure, and this kind of emotionally speaking, the most secure starting point. And I feel like that captures, or is that actually captured in what you just read on the inside flap of the book. And then I forget what you said. What the second part? What did I say in the second part? I'm curious now.
Right after that?
Yeah, after the intuition part.
Let's see. So, okay. After the intuition part, we have recognize and improve inefficient movement.
There you go. Yeah. And here's what's so interesting. I believe, maybe not, but I believe that anybody who actually pays attention to something can intuitively recognize efficiency versus inefficiency. I'm just going to leave it at
that. So what I think is really interesting in looking at, like, by the way, this is a hefty book. Okay, we're at
4.4 pounds.
These are 400 something pages, and these are not small pages. Okay, so like
there's a lot of pictures.
There is a lot of pictures, but it is super detailed, and I feel like it's very physical, detailed instructions. Not to say that it doesn't bring up the mental side of things, but I think it's a lot of physical instruction. And yet I know from working with you and from your podcast and all these other things how important and how much you think about the emotional and mental side of things. So that is one question I had was, were you tempted to go there and you're like, it's already 400 pages, we can't dive into that too? Or did it just not, was it like, I'm writing this manual of this is how we do body, and maybe someday there'll be another book on how to do the rest?
Yeah, let's see if I can keep my ideas here organized. But first and foremost, when I got the opportunity to write the book, I was told to write a book on gymnastics. And when I started writing that, I felt immediately like it didn't align with what I really wanted to say. And then I was in the functional fitness CrossFit space at the time. So I asked the publishing house if I could write about CrossFit, and they said legally you can't. So go back to talking about gymnastics, which is what you teach, supposedly. And I said, well, in reality, what I'm trying to teach is the language of movement. I'm trying to give people a language to articulate what they're seeing intuitively and being able to translate that into producing the best results possible. And that's when, the intellectual, emotional side of things, of course, played a huge role. And I tried to go down that path, and I realized I'm completely deviating from message. And it wasn't until 3.5 years after starting the writing process, when I was approached by the publishing house, that in writing with my co-author, we just decided, you know what, let's just quit. This does not work. We're not ready. We don't have it. We're never going to arrive at a book that's going to be applicable to anybody within the space. So let's just skip it. But we were meeting every week. We were talking all the time. We were writing a lot. We were recording all our conversations. And at the time, Al Gore, who had run for president back in the day, he had just launched one of the first interactive iBooks that you could use on an iPad. And it was all about his ideas on environmental protection and things like this. Besides that point, what we thought was interesting was, whoa, this is cool, an interactive book that you could work with. Maybe what we do is we actually write an iBook, an app, and then we make this almost like an online academy for movement, and we make it specifically for those who care about developing progressions. And this was us kind of being a little bit ahead of time of machine learning, AI possibly, and being able to make the best decisions or create the best methodology applied to the individual. And when we started writing that, what happened was we got this framework, and this framework, what it did was it matched exactly what I was teaching in my seminars, which were these basic movement patterns: push-ups, squats, pull-ups, learning to get on and off the ground. And that ended up becoming the outline for what is the book today. Now, we had to go through this huge, like, roundabout thing to get to that point. And how this relates to this idea of intuition and operating by feel was because, like you said, everything that I was teaching or doing was very physical. But I was incapable in the early stages of my coaching career. I was incapable of articulating that. So in the beginning of my coaching career, especially around the 2000s, I remember performing a movement, trying to teach somebody. I would perform the movement, and as I was performing the movement, I would simply describe what I was doing. And the more I did that, the more those words got recorded, and then I could almost like memorize these words, and they served as a framework that later allowed me to do the same with others. So basically, I would describe what other people were doing. And something that clicked for me was that what I was feeling while describing my own movement pattern, I could feel in the movement pattern of others just by observing them. And yeah, I think that's where the secret to the madness is, or to the method is. And I think that's where this side of the emotional fitness or emotional intelligence that exists in all of us can be deployed in practical manners. So yes, roundabout way, did I want to write about emotions, the cognitive process? Yes, I did, but I couldn't because it would have been an infinite book. Thus, I had to choose to be limited to speaking to one audience, and thankfully it kind of worked out the way it did.
Yeah. Yeah, when I look at the book, and I am no CrossFitter or anything even remotely close to it, so certainly I have not gone through and done the things.
Yeah.
But I have looked at it pretty in depth and read, there's like reading portions, and then there's like very detailed instructions, pictures, all these things. When I look at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's funny. For those that don't know, on the cover here it says maximize sport and life performance with 4 basic movements. That almost sounds like a quick tips and tricks you could stick on the internet, but no. Here it is. It's a beast, and so I feel like with horse training, I have never attempted to get something so comprehensive down. It feels really overwhelming to think like, man, I'm going to write the process. And I mean, how long? It sounds like it took you years. How long did you write this?
Let's see, it started 2010, end of 2010, 2011, and then it went till July of 2014. So yeah, 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it shows. I mean, it's like, wow, that's so cool to dive that deep into what you're doing and get it out there that specifically.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in Horseland, I would, if I took the time to write something like that detailed, I don't know. I think there might be like 4 people on the planet that are interested in that level of detail. Is that your experience, or like,
Yeah,
do
I
you feel
mean,
like it's a bit much for people?
I
Or
don't know how many books have sold, but and
Mhm.
I think it's in the tens of thousands. So, but I think most of those people who have bought the book just have it on their bookshelf, and I would say maybe 4 people have read it. so, yes,
Yes. Okay. Okay.
yeah,
So
yeah, uh,
it's like there's all this amazing information in there, and yet from my experience with horses, I am certain that if one were to go through this whole thing and like do it and
hmm
do it,
hmm
you're going to, gosh, that you're going to come across so many different opportunities for improvement that you had no idea existed, and the places that can take you. So
hmm
cool. So
yeah.
cool. And so I just love how these things relate in how I feel about horse training and how it must be for people doing this stuff.
Yeah, it is interesting, and something that you're bringing up that's very interesting to me is that and I assume anybody who's listening is probably deep in the horse world, and they care deeply about it. When you do the exercise of describing in detail and really thinking through all the way every single one of your actions, and every single one of your protocols, every single one of your interactions with uh, the horse or horses, and the evolution of that over time, and how you feel about those interactions, and then what those feelings evoke in your thinking, and thus inform the next action. You learn a lot.
Mhm.
And for me, this book specifically was really an exercise on self reflection. It was going back to my gymnastics career that I felt fell short as a kid growing up, and being able to kind of heal that, and then reassess basically what gymnastics meant to me growing up and how it was applicable to my life right now. It allowed me to have a thesis on my own physical practice. It allowed me to, I guess, gain way greater compassion and empathy for other people's methodologies and ways of doing things, and realizing that at the core of it, I could not see myself unless I was willing to see everybody else. And as a person who's scared of everything that feels foreign to me, and I can like push it away or be judgmental of it, or say and do things that may be kind of like me just like attacking. Um, yeah, it can be really powerful. And I think anybody who's listening, I think the encouragement here is to, and I've told you this a million times, but keeping some sort of a journal. My my wife Tanya, she makes fun of me when she sees me in my journal. She's like, "Dear diary," but at the same time, it's thanks to that I'm able to see myself, see the way that I think, and see the way that I make decisions, and rectify when I feel uh, or start to believe that it's necessary to do that for the sake of a greater sense of well-being and health and connection, and this just sense of um, just being able to go to bed at night and feeling like, okay, I did everything in my power to do what I think in this moment is right, whether it feels perfect or not.
When you were talking, it reminded me of one of your little gems that I had jotted down here, and that was that practice is how we get information about ourselves from our own bodies and not just from the internet,
Mm,
which I think is great. Um,
yeah.
and that was also kind of reminding me of the paradox of like on one hand, this book is so detailed and epic, and like you went so deep with it. In other scenarios, I might have said, well, when it comes to feel and like my process and how I want to do things, if I write it down, it's not flexible, and now it's like this thing that someone can supposedly like read and copy, and that's not how it is. I think that's one of the things I know I've told you before, like, oh, I can't get into this courses and this and that and stuff. I feel like it's waters things down a little bit. I can only assume that's why your book is so long, because you didn't want that to go there. Was it hard? Was that hard? Was that a challenge, even at this at the length that it is?
Yeah, very hard. I mean, it's very hard to write something that's going to be printed and that takes so much effort to be edited, because you know that that's going to exist, maybe not in perpetuity, but for a long period of time, and the changes of it are going to be so slow that the information that is there is potentially going to become old news tomorrow. And I just lived with that as a reality during the writing process, where it was kind of like, this is a document that goes out tomorrow, and then once it's out, it may be relevant for a few days, maybe a week, 2 weeks, a month. But thankfully, it is actually lasting a little bit longer, and it is still there. But my ultimate dream, and this is where I kind of failed in ways, was to get people to interact with the material, challenge the material, and improve it, make it better. And that's something I wish I had done. And I'm just now slowly starting to come back to that place where I'm thinking about continuing to put out information around the stuff that I already wrote in a way that maybe encourages more people to interact with me and challenge what I think is the way or a way, and see if I can improve upon it. And I think that's to me interesting. And something I used to say at my seminars, talking about courses, was in the beginning, and I would do this to actually take the weight off of my shoulders. That was why I was doing it selfishly, because I didn't want to carry the responsibility of everybody who was there. I was scared. Of course, you have 50, 60 people in attendance, and you're like, who am I to come here and tell you what to do? So let me just take this like burden off of my shoulders. So I was selfishly saying to everybody, anything that I say today is going to potentially be old news tomorrow. The more you interact with me and challenge my ideas, the more information I'm going to be able to give you, because I'm not going to just be a shell of myself, just spewing whatever sound bites I have, but I'm actually going to give you in real time what I'm thinking in a way that hopefully integrates and includes everything that I've thought about up until this point. And then ultimately what I would say was, especially when the book came out, I would say, if you don't have the book or you haven't read the book, just know that it's out there. You can even get a free PDF download, and you all have permission to copy and paste it or change whatever you want and publish your own book. And you can even call it Freestyle. You can call it whatever you want. You should steal my material and utilize it. That's the only way that it will be fully challenged. And this idea of like trying to hold a method like I created or I discovered this thing can actually become like a living method, a living document. In other words, live in this like constant state of adaptation, which is ultimately what I think everybody wants. Everybody wants to be in progression. Everybody wants to be in adaptation towards something that feels a little bit more complete. So yeah, that was just kind of the logic that I was working with, especially at the time, and now it's evolving.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine in taking that long to write it, I'm sure that in itself can be a challenge of like, gosh, I'm not exactly the same as I was 2 years ago, but here I am and I'm this far in. I can't go back and can't redo everything every time I have a new thought, But
Right.
I think at the end of the day, it's more about realizing how those new thoughts go back to the old thoughts. I mean, really, that's what your book is about. The four basic movements, right? So it all comes back to these basics. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. Mastering the basics. I think that's the essence of it.
That is going to lead me to another question that's not so much about the book, but it's more about movement in general. Would you say that when it comes to optimal movement, it is really just about getting out of our body's way and becoming as neutral as possible? I feel like that's something I take away when I look at your book. Again, haven't done some of these physical endeavors by any means, but I feel like a lot of it is about becoming as neutral as possible and getting out of the way of what our mind and bodies can do. I feel like is that what optimal movement is?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay. This is what I know. I think I know. I think that optimal is the best for this moment with our best approach to extrapolating what we think is happening right now, and this decision is going to lead to in the future. I think that's optimal.
Okay.
Now, in order to find optimal, I think it requires a couple things. It requires us to marry our intuition, what our gut is telling us, and what we know, at least through the evidence that we've gathered over time, what we know to be true. And somehow bringing those two together, and when in alignment, making a decision or taking some kind of executive action that produces the most optimal outcome in this moment. When you're saying this, you said something about being neutral with it or like getting out of the way. It's kind of like that like cliche saying of expect nothing, accept everything. Where if I'm moving my body myself and I try to do something that I've never done before, and then all of a sudden in the moment of trying it, it's like I have nothing. I just can't do it. I'm going to have an impression of what just happened, and I'm going to try to reconcile in some way. And I may say to myself, oh my goodness, I'm really weak. I don't know how to do this. I'm incapable of doing this right now. Or I may say, oh man, that was really hard. And I was here thinking that it would be so easy, and it's not. And now I have to completely, change my perception of myself in this world and in this context. So yes, there is a letting go of what we are maybe thinking in the moment. At the same time, there needs to be some positive, I would say, approach to something which we could call deliberate, which this idea of deliberate action is the same thing as talking about deliberate practice, which is an aware approach or a conscious approach to doing something. Now, what tends to happen is that when we are deliberate about something, we become a little bit rigid. And the only thing I can kind of relate this to, like if we're talking about horses or animals, is we have a dog, and our dog Callie is very sensitive. She's a rescue, and her reactivity to her environment is at times extreme. Like she won't walk on wood, and if she does, she like walks very daintily. If she hears a loud noise, she would immediately get worried. If we're out walking, if I with the leash pull her in any capacity, she will immediately kind of pull away and resist. And it's not until I completely relax and give slack to the leash that she can get to the point where she can start to move. And there's this, like, I guess it's like just telepathic. But there's an unspoken language that is almost, this sounds so woo-woo and fluffy, but energetic, where my energy in that moment of not rushing, not pushing, not telling this animal that I'm interacting with, this being that I'm interacting with, to do something, and giving it the free will, free reign, actually produces a result that is optimal for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. That does that kind of answer a little bit of your question, or bring some thoughts up for you?
Yeah. So
I'm just riffing.
Yeah, it's good. So, like, neutral, I feel like can be a physical thing and a mental thing, and I think you actually just talked about both. The physical side of it you talked about with your dog. Mentally, of course, we can get in our own way, and we have to, like, get to that neutral and be accepting of the things. Your dog story is a lot of what happens with horses sometimes. Is kind of like something happens mentally, they're not neutral mentally, and now it has a physical expression of a flinch, or in horsing we would call this a brace. This horse is bracing against me. And another thing I was thinking of when you were talking there was how, you mentioned deliberate practice. Deliberate and feel, I think, are two really hard things to put together sometimes, more so for certain types of people than others. I was definitely one of them, where it's like, I think the deliberate practice part is easy. I love to get all in my head and think through something. But to turn that into something that is feely, that is still, like, receptive and having a really good back and forth with whatever it is in my case, it's a horse, but if it doesn't have to be a living thing, and the movement you're doing or whatever. I know in my teaching, that's one of there's no great way to tell people, like, oh, I've been in your shoes. I know what it felt. I know how awkward you feel right now, but just keep going. You'll get to that feel side of this, and they will start to connect where you can deliberately do these things and still be feely about it and not be like a robot. So
yeah. What's the I'm lacking words right now. What's the opposite of reflexive? Something that's, like, not reactive but reflexive. You just do it reflexively. I'm gonna have to look it up.
The opposite, not a reflex, but I don't know, consciously is, like, what's coming to mind. That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, it's like I wish I had the word on me right now, but I don't know what it is. Let's see. I'm gonna look it up here. What's the opposite of reflexive? Voluntary. Okay, voluntary. So, okay, I think most of us live in, not most of us, I don't think, I kind of know. Most of us operate unconsciously throughout the day. We're just kind of doing. We're very reflexive. And what's interesting about reflexive behavior, which is just this kind of like reacting to what's happening in this moment, is that it produces results just like any voluntary action would. And sometimes those reflexive behaviors are positive outcomes, and sometimes those are negative. I think most of us decide to change our behavior, change the way that we approach things, when we feel impacted by the negative outcomes of our reflexive behaviors. And that's where we move into the state of deliberate practice, which is voluntary, or the conscious choice that will reprogram our reflexive selves, and that being practice. And I think that's where we all live when it comes to trying to produce progress and tapping into this sense or the operating by feel, which is very intuitive, but it's also extremely reflexive. But now it's different than just unconscious behavior or purely reflexive behavior where you're reacting. It's more a responsive reflex, a responsive unconscious choice, because you're to some degree more aware of the action itself, and that's something that you do by feel through your senses. You can sense what the next step is, and this is something. This is something I do. So I'm technically also a personal trainer, so I go home to people and I coach them in their physical practice, and I work with a lot of these kind of high performing individuals who are extremely smart, and they won't let me get away with anything that is not well thought out or in line with the mission or purpose of training. So I'm always going in knowing that no matter how well I've thought things out, things are going to happen that I cannot predict. And I need to trust that the work that I've done in my deliberate practice is going to translate into making decisions in that moment that are going to be the best. And the only way that I can do that is by being fully aligned in the feeling of being the coach, the feeling of connecting with this individual. And this sounds strange, but maybe 10, 15 minutes before I arrive. So if I'm driving, I'm maybe listening to something or whatever, but 10, 15 minutes before I arrive, I start to feel this like nervousness that comes up for me. I just feel like, oh shit, I know what the plan is. I have it right here, but I start to feel this, like these nerves, like I'm about to do this thing. Am I ready? Can I do this? And I have to center myself in a way that I'm telling myself, you are more than capable of making decisions on the fly reflexively that will produce the best outcomes for this individual. And what ends up happening is that as I cross, let's say I'm driving into their property, as I cross the gates, I say, okay, now I'm in it. I have to start letting go of all my logical thoughts, all my ideas of how I expect this to be, and accept that this is going to be the reality. And then the moment I arrive to work with the person, as the person walks into the room, I surrender to the moment, so to speak. I'm using kind of fluffy words here, but I just allow myself to be fully present, fully engaged, and I allow the person that I am to lead, I allow them to lead me. And I do that by, if I may ask a very simple question like, how's the body today? Or anything to report, whatever it may be. And I allow that to become the anchor. And then the moment we start to move, I notice the movement pattern and I allow that feeling, that what I'm seeing, observing, to guide my next decision. And oftentimes what happens is that although I have a plan, I adjust the plan in the moment. And when I allow myself to do that, this is the letting go, this is the removing the resistance, this is the that sense of neutrality that you were kind of talking about, I produce the best outcomes every time, every single time, to the point where I have people that, as I said, are like high performers, and they're like very committed to a certain time. Everything has to happen like in this moment. And if it happens outside of that, then it's like, it doesn't work. I've had these like experiences, and it's been happening more and more lately, where the person doesn't want to leave. That they're like, I'm not ready to be done with this because I'm experiencing something that feels like growth, improvement, hope, connection, whatever you want to call it. And it feels really good. But you can only arrive there if you're willing to be reflexive in nature and secure enough to trust your reflexes and that sense that you have, that feel that you have, from the evidence that you've gained in the results that you produce through your deliberate practice, through your training, your development, your education. It's really powerful, and I think this applies to everybody.
Yeah, that I love listening to that. That dialogue you describe, and I don't mean like the verbal one. Of course, there is the verbal one, but I feel like that energetic dialogue that you're describing. That is why you'd be such a great horse trainer. We got to get you with a horse, Carl. We got to see what happens. It's going to be some kind of magic, because I feel like that dialogue is so special and like fun and addicting. Like you're saying, the person doesn't want to leave. They don't know why. I feel that experience with horses too. They start to get like, they're like, I feel better. I don't know why I feel better. We didn't even do anything yet, or we did, but you didn't, That's really awesome stuff.
Yeah.
Very awesome stuff.
Yeah, it is very awesome, and I think it gets even more awesome when you start coaching the coaches, or you start training the trainers, or whatever you want to call it. And I guess this happens in the horse world, where if somebody has a horse and you work with the person who has a horse, you're coaching the coach, basically. You're coaching the trainer. You're coaching the person that has a direct relationship with a horse. There's something that happens there, because I guess the owner of the horse, or the coach themselves, becomes almost like a channel that improves your information in a way, and at the same time is reflecting back to you whether what you believe to be true is actually true, and if it can be done, said, or adjusted in a way that is actually better. I just think that's powerful.
Yeah, it is. In Horseland, perhaps you would say the same thing. It sounds like when you're working with high-performing people, they are pushing you, you said, but, everybody has the horse. They say you get the horse you need, not the horse you want, this kind of thing.
Isn't that true?
Yeah.
That's exactly true. That resonates deeply with me, yes.
The people that are not really going into things having a dialogue with their horse, they're just like, I'm following the steps. I want to do the steps. I read on this guy's video library that if I do these steps, this will happen. And like, they're kind of transactional like that, and there isn't the dialogue. I don't know that those people would say like, oh, they're learning these deep lessons from their horses. I guess I need to find some and get them on the podcast. I don't know. I got to ask them. But I know that the people that are having this more like dialogue style of training and interacting, it's amazing the things that a horse will teach you, or like, in your case, a human client. It's amazing the things that can come up through those dialogues and interactions, for sure.
I mean, there's definitely something very powerful there, which is when you're in the presence of, I guess, an animal, or even any being, and you're just in silence, it's inevitable to feel something. It's reflecting something back to you. And animals are very interesting because they seem to be the purest form of being present, and at the same time having conscious awareness. It's almost like they know. I've heard this is just, I don't know anything, of course, about animals, but I've heard that dogs, for example, they know when they're going to pass away and they're going to die, and they're completely okay with that. Meanwhile, we're here just like holding on for dear life to every single idea, every single thought, and creating all this resistance that is so painful. And to some degree, this is why I'm relating it to death in this moment. Every moment that we choose or don't choose, but especially when we choose to adapt or to progress, our latest or last self, what we were, just died, and there's so much resistance to that. And I think in the animal world, you get to really experience that, where you're like, oh wow, you have no attachment to who you were just a second ago. It was just something that was embodied in you, like nature, nurture, whatever you believe, and you think the combinations were that got the horse or animal to that point. But you're not attached to who you were. You just, once you release the resistance, you're at the next level, and you don't think about it. The horse doesn't think about it. The dog doesn't think about it. They just are.
Yeah. I think our big brains definitely can, they are a gift, and they can definitely be a challenge as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh
I
yeah,
feel
you know
like,
what? Sorry for interrupting, but I guess what I wanted to make the point is that if you are a dog owner, which sounds weird, it's like you can't really own a dog. You just have a dog in your life. You're not dog owner. It sounds crazy. It's like I'm a slave
I
or
almost
something.
went down
Like,
this
it's
with the
terrible.
word training and trainer, and
Yeah.
we could go down too many rabbit holes there.
Anyways, there's a lot there, but I think if we human beings in relationship to animals are um, being reflected who we are, it's up to us to be more like the animal. And I'm not saying in terms of the behavior of the species, but rather in the capacity to be in connection with the moment and the feeling of the moment. And it's very obvious that animals, although people believe that animals didn't feel, they feel things for sure, and they probably think things. They just think them completely different than we do. And being connected with that through one's intuition is probably the most important um, thing to do. And thus, it can't be mechanical. It has to be an emotional process first.
I always say that I, I don't. I think if I had gone through your book, the same thing could have happened, but I chose the horse route instead. And
Yeah.
horses are what allowed me to learn how much I was in my head. Like when you're in your head, you don't know you're really in your head. You're just there, you know? Like I didn't know until horses, and specifically one horse that I apparently needed, helped me figure out like, oh, there's like this whole other universe of feel and stuff going on with your body there. And yeah, thank goodness for animals for that. But and
Yeah.
yeah, like I'm saying, I always say animals, but clearly it's the same thing. You can go through this body movement, athletic stuff, and kind of come to the same place, which does lead me to a question I wanted to ask you actually. Do you feel like you do you have to fight being a heady person, being like in your head? Is that a big fight
Yes.
for you? And if
It's the
so,
worst.
okay,
It's the
how
worst.
is it through your gymnastics and this body stuff that you like learned to get out of your head and in your body, or was it something else, or a whole lot of things?
Yeah, a whole bunch of things, but I can tell you right now, I'm a very anxious person, and I'm constantly thinking about the endless possibilities that lay in front of me, and it's overwhelming to the point where it becomes paralyzing. Like sometimes I can't see. Sometimes I feel dizzy, or my hands are tingling, or I just start to panic, and I think I'm totally dying. Uh, and this is something that I've had my whole life. I'm just an anxious person. What can I do? But I've tried many different methods for improving it. Meditation, of course, movement training, that's helped. But as a kid, um, my mom was, of course, the first one to, of course, notice that, okay, this kid is anxious. He needs something to help him process this. And she would do very physical things with me, like she would like squeeze me really tight, or like just hold me in a way that was like not like restraining me, but like in a loving way. Or if I was having an outburst of just like madness, she could confine the space in a way where she could just sit with me there and allow me to settle. Or if I would wake up in the middle of the night, we would do like something like she would have me squeeze my feet and then relax them, squeeze my legs, relax them, some relaxing techniques, breathing techniques. And then she would also talk to me where she wasn't talking, she was just letting me talk. So she was extremely good at helping me process anxiety. On top of that, when I started doing gymnastics, that was the first time that I knew that I had some control over my actions, and that those actions changed or altered the way I felt in the moment. So gymnastics was huge. And the thing that gave me the most sense of security was having a progression. And in my case, it was if you're a level X, let's say 8 gymnast or whatever, and you're supposed to perform these movements in competition, it was working those movements and towards the goal of being able to do those movements and then being able to compete them or showcase them in a way that you would get a result, and that would give you some information about where you were standing within your progression. And that feeling really good, like in my brain, like cognitively, like I know that I'm doing this, and that gives me the evidence to relax the rest. But as I grew older, I remember starting to have these panic attacks, and they started in 2010. And that was when social media was just starting to boom. And I remember using Instagram at the time and just kind of scrolling and being like, I don't know what is happening to my body. I really thought I was sick, like I was having a stroke or something. And it was just extreme anxiety of like scrolling, trying to find the next thing. Like, what am I looking for? And I think we do that often, and we're not even aware of it. It's kind of like we're chasing something. We're in this like rat chase. And I think this happens when we become coaches or trainers, or we are in relationship with an animal that needs some of our assistance, or we have chosen to work together, whatever it may be, where we're trying to project our desired outcome. And that desired outcome, when it doesn't arrive fast enough, produces a feeling that informs our belief system in a way that produces great resistance. And I think the number one job is to work on releasing that cognitive resistance so that we can physically be there. And everybody has different ways of doing it. I have to work really hard. I tend to skew negative. Okay, I tend to skew to the like bad, something is wrong, whatever. And it takes a lot of effort for me to just turn the ship around. And I've tried a million things, and it just continues to be my MO. But I work on it, and anybody who I work with, they're always like, "Oh, you're so freaking positive," and I'm like, well, if you just knew how like mentally crazy it feels in here, and how much effort it took me to get to this state where I'm like smiling, you'd be shocked. But I think that's what we all really have to do. And I wish I could tie it into like what maybe horse trainers experience, but I assume what happens when you're working with such a majestic big horse is that it's almost like the horse doesn't force you, but it definitely to some degree encourages you. Like you can use force and be like violent towards this thing, and it's like that's not what you want to be. That's not who you want to be, really. You're just doing it because you're frustrated. It's kind of like when I lose it with my toddler. He's gonna turn 4 here soon, and sometimes I'm just like, I just want to fucking grab you and like, can you just listen to me, right?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right? But the moment you do that, you totally regret it.
Yeah. Well, and I know in my experience, if you don't regret it in the moment, I'll regret it later when she copies it back to me, and I'm like, well, wonder where she learned that from.
Totally.
Yeah. So
my sense is that this is where animals are the purest form of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, they become the best mirrors. But because there is no language, there is a language, of course, between us and animals, us and nature for sure, but because there's no language in our sense of like written language, spoken language, I think a lot of people, and maybe you can tell me if I'm right or wrong here, tend to skew towards a place where they actually think that the way that they're doing things is the right way, although they are being, to some degree, violent, inflicting pain. And although they're producing the desired outcome, that outcome is not necessarily a healthy one or positive one, or even one that will last a long period of time. And yeah, I don't know.
I think because, like with horses,
Yeah.
because we cannot have verbal and written conversations, I know in my case, that is what ultimately, because I kept aiming to get better, I guess that's an important part of it. Because I kept aiming to get better, I was forced to figure out how to communicate more in my body. Like, for example, with this particular trainer, Josh Nickel, shout out, Canadian trainer, amazing. He helped me. I remember specifically saying to him, yeah, like I don't dance. I'm kind of stuck to the ground. I'm not light. You know, all these things. And he was the one that made me real, he was essentially telling me, your horse needs you to say it with your body. You're saying it in your head. He can't hear it in your head. Or maybe he can, but he's not going to let you get away with that like all these other horses have. He needs you to say it in your body, mean it all the way through your body. And that's where it turned into, well, but I'm not a dancer, and I'm stuck to the ground, and this is how I am. This is how I am. And ultimately, he was the one that made me realize this isn't how you are. This is how you became for whatever reason, and you can be light, and you can get out of your head, and you can communicate with your body, and so.
Well, yeah, very interesting. I don't know if this maybe is interesting to hear or not, but my mom has always been somebody who is constantly exploring, like, what does it mean to be alive, and like this conscious awareness. And one of the things that she heard about a long time ago was this Hawaiian prayer, which I think it's a thing, but it's Ho'oponopono. That's what it is. And basically what it says is, sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. Sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And she's always said that to me, like, hey, you just have to let go. Sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. Like, use this as like a mantra almost, that's what it is. It's a release of the mind. And when you think about it through this little mantra, this prayer or whatever, it says, sorry, I'm sorry is basically saying I feel it. You can relate it to sorrow, or if you translate sorry into Spanish, lo siento, which is I feel it, is you say I feel it. Oh, in this moment I feel something. Please forgive me, which is allow me to let go of this feeling. And then you say thank you, which is I appreciate the moment. I appreciate being aware of the feeling and now having let go of that feeling. And appreciation, if you think about it in terms of like the appreciating value of an asset, that moment just grew, positively speaking. And then you say I love you, which is moving towards something, leaning into something. Yeah, I feel like that's what anybody who cares about having a meaningful relationship especially if you're in a relationship that is conducive for growth, needs to have something to facilitate that resistance that we create, that cerebral thing, that belief that we are rigid and we cannot be light or we cannot be connected, but is totally possible. And I mean, the evidence is there. And the more one practices, has a practice, like an internal practice that feels somewhat like that, looks a little bit like that, we tend to become better at communicating, connecting, and moving or growing together. And I think this applies to humans, applies to a relationship to self, and most likely applies to any living being out there.
Yeah. Now that will be, you've mentioned your mom a few times, and that'll be the perfect little shift over to the podcast, because I have heard you mention your mother on the podcast as well. And in fact, one of my favorite episodes, I have several, but one of my favorite ones is with Diane Fu. And you guys, there's a lot of awesome nuggets in there. I re-listened to it not that long ago, and I was like, yeah, that's why I love that one. It's so good. But
what
you talk about
say?
your mom. A lot of stuff.
Anyway,
you talk about parenting, and I loved listening to what you guys had to say. I feel like I am trying to parent the way that Diane describes, and I kind of, it's different than perhaps how I was parented. And you tell a story about the haircut and the shoe and the breaking the glass and what your mom did, and I was like, wow, gosh, I don't know very many saintly people that would respond in that way to you getting a bad haircut, throwing a shoe into a glass door. I forget how old you said
it was like over 100 years old. You can't replace that type of glass. Yeah. Me just throwing a tantrum basically at the ripe age of 12 or whatever, 10, 11. I don't know. I can't remember. But let's just say it was inappropriate behavior for having a bad haircut.
Yes.
But then being immediately forgiven as somebody that's saying, okay, you are not your actions. And this is only language that I have now. And this actually comes from my wife helping me understand our daughter, who we fostered and then adopted as a teenager, and me not having language for understanding who she was. Beyond her behaviors, basically.
How you mentioned just a minute ago that your mom is like a seeker. I forget how you said it, but wants to know why we're here and all of this stuff. Where did she get that?
I don't know. I think she's always been a very curious person. Like yesterday, she was like, hey, here are some alternative theories on evolution. Very complex, but just listen to them, see what you think. And I'm like, how did you find this? Like, how did you get to this point? And it's because she just goes down the rabbit hole. She knows a lot. And she is just somebody who's has a very good sense of what right and wrong is. She has this like internal moral compass that is extremely strong. And although she's not able to articulate it in words, anybody who's kind of around her senses it. And I think for me, just because I was a challenging kid growing up, because I was to some degree disturbed, internally disturbed emotionally, for whatever reason. I was just born anxious. And this disturbed meaning I was unsettled.
Right.
Just very unsettled. And her there never being any conditions to my behavior. She wasn't like, oh, you're behaving like you're being destructive. It was not like, oh, I don't love you anymore for being destructive. It's more like, oh, I see that you're scared. and that's why you're reacting this way. And there's a better way. Let me try to help you get to a state of being where you can actually do that. And I think this is where she really just instilled this idea of not necessarily emotional fitness, intelligence, but rather emotional fitness, which now at the ripe age of 43 or whatever, I define as the capacity to move into a state of being that translates into purposeful action. In other words, to be able to experience whatever you're sensing right now, your emotional state, translating those emotions into something that is has some logic to it, something that you can articulate, that you have a grasp of, and then translating that into one's, or in this case, my own purpose, that which I want to see be a reality. And I think living in that state is extremely powerful. Super hard to do, but extremely powerful. Mm-hmm. And that comes from, just my mother's presence.
Well, she sounds awesome. Not to drag your mom into this the whole time. Let's talk about your mom on the podcast.
Yeah, she is, and she has no clue I talk about her, but
really,
it's the truth. It's the truth. And I talk to her probably almost every day. And I'm so lucky I get to do that. And we have very crazy, fringe conversations. She's willing to go there, and I'm like, that's fun. You don't have to have it all thought out all the time. You can actually explore things that are going to be hard to articulate.
Maybe you need to have your mom on the podcast.
I would love that. At the same time, it's kind of like I don't think she would want to be on the podcast. You know?
Yeah,
it would be more uncomfortable. We would have to be recording for hours and hours and hours. But you know what's interesting? She did actually, when we were kids. She's a painter. So she would sit there painting, and as we were playing at her feet or whatever, just like around her, she would have a recorder recording our conversations or anything that we were saying, or just like the sounds of us like playing around. So she was like the original podcaster. It just never got
well, so you need to do that then.
published.
Don't make her do a video version. Just set up a recorder and have a long chat. Probably be very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I took every conversation we've had in written form and every single thing that she has sent me, like links and stuff, you could get a pretty good grasp of like where her mind is and how she thinks. And I'm sure with AI these days, you can probably create a nice little translation. I mean, it's possible.
Oh, that's funny. Now, as far as the podcast goes, you are not currently making new episodes, but there is still a library of your episodes out there. I love the whole enchilada, the whole thing, because I feel like you left up multiple format shifts and like different things. You kind of went different directions with it, and stopped and started, I believe, a few times.
Yeah, 3 times.
3 times, and just kind of left that there and left it as it is, which I appreciate. And as I went through, as I got more into your stuff, I ended up listening to the whole collection.
That's insane. That's over 100
really
episodes.
Inspiring. It is very inspiring.
Wow.
To see like the different things you've done with it. So certainly, I'm not going to say, I started a podcast because of Carl Paoli's podcast. It's not like that. I was a fan of the podcast and still would have said, there's no way in hell I'm going to ever make a podcast.
I'm so glad you did.
Yes, it's a different piece of the conversation. That's that corner turner piece, I guess. But I love how you just like put it out there. And then also I love the variety of people and things that I've been introduced to through your podcast that I would have just never, like, if you look at the title, I would never just out of the blue, like, pick that podcast. Like the Diane Fu one I mentioned, or Benjamin Zander on classical music. I loved that one. I just wouldn't have picked them. But then you listen and you're like, there's some amazing gems in here. Somewhat, I think, is like, because I like you and how you think, and you bring the conversation a certain direction. But in other ways, it's just introduced me to really cool stuff. Breakdancing is another one of those things.
Wow.
I just would have. I have a brother that did some breakdancing back in the day, and that was the end of that. I would have never like thought about it again probably until I heard some artists on your podcast, and It's like, this stuff is so cool. And then when the Olympic stuff came up, I watched it, and it is just fascinating. I'm very intrigued, obviously, by movement and body and that kind of thing. And so that has been a really cool thing that I thank you for introducing me to. I wouldn't have been introduced, I don't think, without the podcast. So,
Jeez.
Love it.
Thank you. That's awesome. You know, sometimes we do things like, especially if we're doing them publicly, like this podcast. I started the podcast just because I was curious about. I'm always curious about new formats and new ways of doing things. So I always wanted to do a podcast. I didn't think I could, and then this app launched. I can't remember what year it was. I think it was 2019. It's called Anchor FM. Now it's Spotify or whatever. But you could just record this podcast on your phone. So I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, I can just put out a voice memo, and then it gets published on these podcast platforms, and I don't have to do anything. So that was kind of this like low resistance way of just being able to find new ways of expressing myself. And what's always happened to me with every new avenue or channel of communication, like public communication, I've always felt like, oh, in the beginning, I can actually say whatever I want and however I want to do it. And I can show a side of me that doesn't make sense if I presented it elsewhere. People would be like, what is this? Sounds crazy. Because nobody's listening. Nobody's on the other side. And then you do it for a while, and what ends up happening is that you start to either build an audience or people start to engage with it. And then all of a sudden you start to put yourself in this like box where you're like, I have to stay on mission. I have to stay on purpose. I have to stay on this like thing. And I was like, I just don't want to be in a box. I just don't want to talk about one topic. I don't want to have this like single umbrella that constantly tells me what I should be putting out there. I just want to put out whatever feels really good. And that's what actually made me stop several times. But my ultimate goal was, can I find a way of just continuing to have the conversations that I want to have? And in some ways make this a sustainable initiative. And that's where it always goes wrong. If I try to make the podcast something that produces an outcome, let's say one of my goals is to have a bigger audience, then my numbers just go down. They people stop listening. They stop downloading. If I think about, okay, I'm going to try to monetize this thing, then it's like it becomes almost impossible to monetize. I don't know what happens, but the universe basically says, no, you can only do this if you're doing it because you want to do it. Otherwise, it just doesn't become very authentic. It doesn't become genuine. It's not really coming from a place where, you or anybody else can feel the care. So that's why I've stopped multiple times. But now that you're saying this, it's kind of like, oh, out of the thousands or whatever, there's one person that actually got something out of it. Maybe I should go. Maybe I need to do this.
I'm not the only one. I'm just gonna put that.
It's amazing. It's amazing. But at the same time, the part that's most important here is that my ego can immediately be like, see, this person was interested. I should start putting out more episodes. More people will be interested. And now I'm doing it for somebody else and not necessarily for me. And I have to really think, okay, if I want to do this, how do I want to do it? Who do I want to do it with? And can I completely let go of the outcome of it and just do it because I feel like doing it, or because I think I have a sense that it could be good?
Yeah, you that we'll go back to the corner turners thing. So corner turners are people, animals, events, whatever that change the trajectory of our lives. So I was not a person before a corner turning event. I was not a person that would have thought this would be fun at all. This would be very anxiety inducing. And I don't know if it's because, I guess partly because of like worrying about like numbers and is it productive? You know, I have a thing with the word productive. That word likes to taunt me a little bit here and there. Things have to be productive.
Yeah.
And, you know, is this productive? I don't know. It's fun. I didn't, but it just didn't seem like a possibility before. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, this is actually just a really fun excuse to like talk to people. And as I said to you, I think before we started recording, we've talked about a lot of things, but I haven't sat down and talked to you about your book ever. Like we've never talked about your book. So that was kind of a, you know, you get to do fun things like that. Could we do it without recording it? Yes, but why not?
Yeah,
you know?
Why not record it? And you know, you never know who's out there listening.
There's no reason not to, and I think in a way it almost just helps with like the accountability of sitting down and getting it done. Would I have carved out the time to be like, Carl, let's sit down and have a long chat about
whatever
your mom and the book and all this stuff? You know, probably we should have been, but would we without the podcast? I don't know. You know, right? So anyway,
that's correct.
So thank you once again. I know I said it earlier for being one of my corner turners and helping me to make some tough decisions. That this will go back to actually the Diane Fu episode. Another thing you talked about was like creating the space for change. I did not have any space to change anything. I was paralyzed. I was too stuck to be able to change anything, and that's one of the cool things you guys talked about.
That's very cool.
A lot. So, in the spirit of corner turners, can you tell me, do you have any that come to mind? Obviously, I forced you to bring your mom up. You got
totally. I mean, I was born, so
right. It's a pretty big corner turner for everybody.
Plays a huge role there. Yeah, for sure. I mean, my parents, of course, it's like they're number one. My mother and my father in completely different ways. Just because they've always been super unconditional in the way that they believe in me and they trust me wholeheartedly, and they've never doubted anything about me, and they've been very good at guiding with a gentle yet firm hand. And I'm not talking about like you have to do this, but gentle and but very convinced in the ways that they've guided me, and that has been very reassuring. So that's like in general. Then there's been a lot of people that I've interacted with that have been corner turners for me, and I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but in high school I was doing gymnastics full time, performing at a high level, and I was very just like committed to being a great athlete. And at the time, you know, kids were starting to go out and they were starting to drink. And there was this girl who actually sat next to me in class. And one Monday she didn't show up. And unfortunately, she had a motorcycle accident that weekend after going out and passed away. And that was like one of those moments where like, oh, wow, our decisions, whether we're aware of them or unconscious of them, they have like serious, they can produce serious outcomes that can be devastating, like the loss of life. So that's like one moment where I was like, oh yeah, I'm not touching alcohol ever. So never drank.
Really?
Never.
Wow.
Yep.
I feel like growing up in Spain, that's rare.
Very hard to do. Yeah, very rare. Yeah, so that was like one, and it's been something that has like I've had to revisit many times, and I don't talk about it often, but that was a big moment. Then if I go forward and I just think about people that have like helped me transcend, there's been a lot, but I would say that the biggest one was meeting my now wife Tanya. She was the opposite of what I thought I needed, and for whatever reason I was very attracted to this opposite thing that yeah, just really allowed me to see myself in a completely different light, and in a way that I needed. It was almost like it produced this like discipline that I needed to have. So that was huge. And then when our foster daughter moved in with us, she was only a teenager, but she was a huge game changer for me, because I thought that everybody had the tools to navigate this world, and that you just had to like suck it up and kind of do it, and it was very obvious what was right or wrong, and yeah, just like do better type thing. And here was a person who's like, hey, I've struggled since the moment I was born. I wasn't even held, and now as a teenager you're gonna have to hold me and not project any of your beliefs or thoughts of what is right or wrong, and just do this thing, just hold me. And that being so transformative and producing this extremely powerful bond. And so that's another corner turner for me. Tanai, that's our daughter. And then 4 years ago, our grandson was born, and me and my wife in that moment having decided, we're leaving the country. We're done with this. Let's go to Europe. And I wanted to be closer to my family. They all live out there. So we're like, we'll do this. Our daughter is, she's in her 20s. She's out there doing her life, but he was born. And then we started to reconnect and rekindle our relationship with our daughter. And he would spend, a day with us, a night with us. And then one day, this little sucker with his little cute eyes kind of looks at me and smiles, and I'm like, holy shit, I'm not going anywhere. Like, I'm not leaving this kid. Of course, I'm like crying and like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I go into Tanya, I'm like, we're not moving to Sweden. We're not going anywhere. We're staying right here. This is where we need to be. So yeah, he's another big one. And then, every single person that I interact with in some way gives me a little adjustment and tells me, hey, this is the path that you're on, or, that you can actually change your ways if you just choose to do it. And let me just kind of like gently show you that. So those are a couple of moments or people, and it's
nice. I imagine
powerful ones.
The kid thing is very powerful, and certainly a huge piece of what has shaped what I'm doing and why. I hadn't thought about how different. It's kind of like you got it swapped for me. You got the teenager part, and then you got to come to the little kid part. I'm sure that is an interesting way. I almost feel like it when they're little babies. It's like they're so delicate and so they're just, and you can't speak to each other in a way. I think that probably makes it easier than the way you experienced it. That's very interesting to think about.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's
I don't know if it's easier. It's just different. But yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. It's a little bit more simple when you're dealing with the baby. I remember the baby, I'll be like, oh my God, you can't even understand what I'm saying. I don't know what you're saying. Do you have a tummy ache, or you can't sleep? Or are you uncomfortable? Like, what's going on? And I remember having to really tap into my intuition. And I just remember our grandson's name is Romeo. He's technically my son, but I just remember, I just have to hold you. That's all I have to do. I just have to hold you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I guess it's without the language being there, it does force you to get into the feel. You can't get stuck on the language. And I know, I mean, myself as a teenager, I had some snotty language, so it probably is maybe easier to not have that there. It kind of forces you to get into the feel thing. I don't know. So that's interesting to think about.
I do think that's the power of parenting. Like, I never understood. I didn't know if I wanted to be a parent or not. And then the way that we became parents was not planned. But the moment I became a parent, I was like, oh, this is so fundamental to who we are as beings on this planet. Because it's unlocked this like completely new thing. And it's not that I can't relate to people that don't have kids. I completely understand it, and I completely respect it. At the same time, what I've noticed is that the people in my life that don't have kids just operate at a completely different level of understanding of the world, or at least yeah, it's it's hard to say it without
Definitely,
being
I
judgmental, but
feel.
it's a thing. It's a thing, and
I thought I was
yeah.
not going to have kids, and so I went a long time and was perfectly happy with like horses. You know,
Which
there
makes
was
sense.
just absolutely no need to do that, and at least that's how it felt at the time. And then it's one of those things I try not to talk to people about it too much, because it's like I don't know how to say without being rude or like offending that like you can't say you don't want to be a parent until you've tried it, but then once you're there you can't go back. So right. I get it. I get not wanting to try it.
I mean, I have a friend that's he's my age, or he's like a year younger or something. And the other day he's like, Carl, I think I'm ready. And I was like, oh, is he gonna tell me he's like ready to be a parent? And I was like ready to be like so supportive. He's like, I'm ready to start finding a new job. I was like, Jesus. And I was just like, that is wonderful. Like, it's just when you've had the sleepless nights, when you've seen them suffer, when you've been around in a way where you know that every single thing that you do is affecting them, that you are a co-regulator, like regulation, learning to regulate. And this is something that you do with animals. We're constantly co-regulating with our animals. It's like when you're co-regulating with somebody else, it creates this bond that is so deep and so meaningful, where it allows you to transcend space and time, and everything just makes sense. And then life and death just meet right there. And it's where for a moment you get a glimpse of what the meaning of life is, or at least this perceived meaning of life. And I think the more we can go to that place, live in that place of connection at that level with not only our kids, but with everybody, the planet, the universe, like space in general, and every single being in it, I just think we're better. Like, we just make better decisions.
I know for me, I always say horses, like the work I did with horses is what prepared me to be able to parent, because I don't. There's a lot of things that if I think about what would have happened if I had been a parent much earlier, it's hard to comprehend. So horses taught me how to be a parent, and then being a parent has made me so much more open-minded and like less less judgy about other people. Probably for a lot of different reasons, but that's one big thing. If I look at like me before and me now, is like I'm a lot less judgy of people. Maybe because I see that little baby in everyone now. If I try or something, I don't know what it is, but it's definitely a different thing. Yeah, definitely.
It really is, and I think that's why being in the world of development, whether it's in working with horses or working with other people who have horses, or me as a personal trainer within the fitness space, or a coach of coaches, or whatever it may be, when you're in the relationship business, you are encouraged at least to move beyond what you believe to be true and let go of all of that which is not significant, meaning is not the essence of the moment or the person or the being that you're interacting with. And there being something that is very pristine and very just powerful, that just feels like peace. It feels like being at ease. And that I think every single one of us, to some degree, yearn for, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. And if we get to do it through working with horses, which I know that there's a lot of people who do like therapy with horses and with like puppy therapy or whatever, and like dogs, and it's because that connection with that being is a mirror into what exists in us, and gives us access to that place, even if it's just for a moment. And there, I think the secrets lie. And then you go back to reality, and you have to translate it into a method. And this is how we get your horse into whatever to be transported. So it's like that kind of thing.
Yes.
But you tapped into the thing for a moment. You were one with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So basically, what we're saying here is, you have to become a parent if you're going to be a good horse trainer. I think that's the circle we just made, right?
Totally. Or you can just be a horse parent.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
did we go too far out there, or
no?
How many of you did we lose in this conversation?
Well, that would be assuming we started with any in the first place, Carl. So
exactly,
and we're not going to go there because we don't care. I don't care how many people listen to this. We're just having a good time and recording it.
I love it.
Well, I really appreciate all of your time today. We better start to wind this down. We have been at it a while here.
Let's do it.
Now, as I said, you're not posting podcasts at this time. Where can someone go if they? I guess they can still listen to the podcast, but where would you tell someone to go if they want to follow along and learn more about you? What are you doing?
Yeah, what am I doing? What am I doing? Most people email me, and then through email, we kind of just get into a conversation. I've just recently been a little bit more deliberate on posting on the controversial X platform. And that's kind of thanks to you, actually. So I blame you for that. And I was the one that told you to do it. And then I was like, well, I better practice what I preach. So I'm going to do it there. So you can find me on X, you can find me on Instagram. I do check my DMs, so I am there, and I am kind of lurking in the shadows. Like, what are people up to? What can I judge them on
shadows
today?
On Instagram,
totally, it's hilarious. And then, don't find me on Facebook. Unfortunately, I was hacked, and now it's some Korean website.
Okay.
And I haven't recovered my site. Or you can go to my website, freestyleconnection.com. You'll find some of my information there. It's still pertinent and relevant. That would be the way.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate your time today. I had a lovely time chatting about all the things. Things I didn't know we would talk about. Some things I did. So loved it.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And maybe in 100 episodes, I get to come back and revisit.
Yes. Does it have to be 100?
Can we do? It can be 10. It can be 2. It can be next episode. I'll be back.
Okay. This is actually my new co-host, Carl Paoli.
Hello.
The Optimized Equine Podcast.
I should have changed my backdrop into like a one of those like a horse stable or something.
Yes.
That's what I should have done. Damn, I should have thought about that.
Next time.
Okay, next time. All right. Thank you.
That's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you can, please rate or review the show, subscribe, comment, share with a friend. We also really appreciate your participation on social media. Anything you may be called to do will help us reach new listeners and help the style of horsemanship to flourish. Until next time, happy horsing.